Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
What's the worst nightmare you ever had? Okay, I have never talked about this ever, but maybe now is the time. I used to have this one dream when I was very young where I was traveling down an old, destroyed road with my mother or another family member. It was kind of post-apocalyptic and I could hear screams and devastation happening all around me, but my mom wouldn't let me look around. Every few minutes at an interval, something horrid was happening where the sky turned to blood and a voice would screech something out as if a demon were speaking it, and any child who heard the words would lie down and die. My mom would yank me to her and cover my ears whenever it started, sobbing, and holding me close until it passed before continuing on down the road to some ruined house that I suppose was our destination. I had this dream often, but every time, I saw something else happen. Once, I was able to look down at the road as my mom carried me and I saw a little girl lying by a fence post with blood coming out of every one of the orifices on her face while her mother rocked back and forth over her, wailing. We made it to the house once and my family was there, holding me close while we hid away from a window. I was maybe 3 or 4 when I had these dreams, but I'm now 21 and I still remember them vividly and the pure sense of dread that occurred during and after them. When I was a kid, walking home on a normal day in the neighborhood, there was always a mysterious house that was kind of small, blinds were always down, there were 3 steps going down to the main entrance with thin, black handrails which were on the sidewalk. As I was watching my mother and me walk in front, holding hands, the door opens, ghosts and demons shooting out of the darkness behind the door, blaring at us. My mother covered my ears and pulled me to her, but I managed to break free and walk towards the door slowly. I could see my grandma standing there and looking at me. She looked at me in horror as I was trying to reach her and grab her hand, but suddenly the door shut, and I was knocked over. My mother and I then simply walked home. The sky got really dark, and I asked my ma if my grandmother is in hell. She just told me that she isn't dead yet. That was one intense dream. I had it around 11 years ago and it returned. I just had it last night. I think something bad will happen to my grandma. Edit, 3 hours after posting this comment, my parents just came back from my grandma's house. I told my mother about the dream, and she said that my grandma isn't feeling well and that she looks sick and exhausted. There's a guy standing in a completely white background. He is wearing a black tuxedo and has a giant white coffee mug on his head. He doesn't move at all, but just screams really high-pitched and loud. I don't know how long I dreamed this, but it seemed to go on for about 20 to 30 minutes. My mom died in November. I have had this dream a few times since. She is present in my house. But she looks alive, but I know she is dead. Someone with authority tells us sometimes when people are dead, they are unaware of it and need to just be around until they slow down and stop. So, we, my extended family, spend time trying to figure out how to make her understand she needs to go. She is not a ghost, she is solid, but not really mentally there. We try including her and excluding her and nothing works. So finally, I tell her she is dead, and she freaks out and starts screaming in fear. I received a message saying that someone I loved and cared about would be killed each day for the next 11 days, and on the 12th day it would be me. It had a list of everyone that would be killed on each day, and I could tell them to run or hide or try to escape, but it wouldn't matter. I ran to my family and friends and warned them all. But still, without fail, they mysteriously disappeared every day and the next day their stone-cold dead bodies showed up on my doorstep. Slowly everyone I knew that meant anything to me was killed, and then on the 12th day I knew it would be me. My family had hidden and tried everything to escape, but it didn't work, so I knew nothing I did would prevent my inevitable outcome. So, I just sat in my empty house, waiting. There was really no reason to even care about being alive anymore since everyone I loved was dead. So, I just sat there, waiting. I heard footsteps outside my door, a knock. And then I woke up. Most terrifying and devastating dream I've ever had. It took me days to recover. My worst dream was one I had numerous times. I would walk into my grandma's house and all the female members of my family were crying downstairs. As soon as I walked in, my mom started screaming I had to go upstairs. He wouldn't explain why. I ran upstairs confused. All the males in my family were upstairs. I found my dad and asked him what was going on. He told me to be quiet and that he was coming. A smartly dressed man entered the room, but I knew he was evil. It later turned out he was the devil. He started killing everyone upstairs because I had been late. My turn came, but my dad shielded me from the small kitchen knife he was killing everyone with. I chose this time to run. When I got downstairs, all the women had been beheaded as my dogs were hanging by their legs from the roof. I made it down the street, then he got me, and he just kept smashing me into the ground over and over again, whilst wearing my dad's face. I had a dream like this once. This crazy woman had captured me and some other kids and was forcing them to work in her house. She is killing anyone who doesn't do what she wants. I grab as many kids as I can and get them out of there. She attacks me, shoots me in the back. I can feel pellets inside the skin of my arm and back. She is crazy and tries to kill me with a knife. I turn it around on her and stab her. It felt horrible, slicing into her stomach, but she just grinned at me and carried on coming. I got out of there and we are on the run. The police won't help us, and I am wanted for attacking an old woman. We ended up in this old house. It all seemed fine until I got this strange feeling. I yell at the kids to get out as this tall man in a white mask comes out of nowhere and starts killing all the kids. He rips them apart, stabs them, throws them around like rag dolls. Most escaped out of the bathroom window, but I couldn't get out. I ran down the stairs and I'm suddenly in my mom's house. I charged out of the front door and down the driveway. The masked man caught up to me. I turned around to face him. He attacks and I transform somehow and use a rider kick, finishing move from Cayman Rider, and he blows up in front of me. I stood at the end of the driveway, panting. I look around and say, next time, I'll be ready. At this point, a huge rumble of thunder wakes me up suddenly. It was so amazing, scary, and the ending was just awesome timing. I had a dream once when I had the flu and was hopped up on NyQuil where I kept opening and closing a door while the first verse of Hotel California played constantly the entire 10 hours I slept. It was horrible. I knew in my dream that I was in this infinite loop, but I couldn't stop doing it and woke up because NyQuil works better than anesthetics on me. Finally, when it wore off enough, I woke up screaming, sweating, and with a massive headache. I've had one trip where I was stepping in and out of odd horrific loops and one where I was completely sucked into a dreamlike awareness like this of constantly hallucinating different scenes, dialogues, and inner monologues playing out with the same morbid, pessimistic themes. Somebody summed them up recently in a thread about the most depressing truths about life or something to that effect. The idea that all we do to help others ends up being ultimately selfish because of our desire to benefit ourselves from it, and I couldn't conclusively reach an idea of goodness. Lots of other themes. It was one of those trips that was psychologically eviscerating, going through so many avenues of thought. I was going back and forth between different poles and coming to new conclusions that were all just as oppressive. I've also had nightmares involving demonic possession, which also lead to having dozens of false awakenings mingled with sleep paralysis. Some of them would end up having these same moral loops and were indistinguishable from the bad trips I've had. Just constantly waking into new realities that seem normal and safe and forgetting what had been happening before, then going and starting a conversation that veers into very dark territory, then everyone starts laughing knowingly and things start falling apart into madness. When I was in high school, I had this kid come over that I smoked out on a regular basis since he had no money. Well, one day he comes over saying that he has this new story from a smoke shop and that I have to try it. It was salvia, the 100x kind that comes in the glass vial, and I had never smoked this before. Anyways, 3 large bong hits of super strong incident later, I was freaking out because I thought I was stuck in an endless time loop. I kept hallucinating him asking me the same question over and over, until I finally broke and screamed, "Where am I?" I was sitting on my own bed, in the house that I had lived in for 13 years. I'm at my girlfriend's parents' house, sitting in their living room on their uncomfortable couch, discussing with them the fact that she and I are having some problems in our relationship and that in spite of what she says, they're not all my fault. To my left, she is naked, and riding some man, and very visibly enjoying it. Her parents don't seem to even notice, and they continue grilling me on what I'm going to do to make this relationship better. Without stopping what she's doing, she also turns to me and says, "Yeah, how are you going to make this better?" That's when I start strangling her, until I wake up. A few years ago, I fell asleep at a friend's house after a night of drinking. I remember just staying up late with people and hanging out until I felt sober enough to go to bed, and then they let me stay in their guest room. That's when I had the worst nightmare experience of my life. I remember it so well, it was like I never even fell asleep. The second I laid down and closed my eyes, there was a blinding light all around me. I had to squint just to look around to try and see what was going on. I felt the bed vibrate and there was an odd humming sound all around that would go back and forth between very loud to very quiet. The room was wavy, like there was gas all around me distorting my perception. It suddenly became very hard to breathe, like breathing through a straw. Of course, I started to panic and that made it worse. I stood up to leave the room but kept losing my balance. I fell so many times and started crying as I clawed at the carpets and the blankets on the bed. My legs and arms wouldn't respond properly, and my neck was also very weak. I tried to speak and all that came out were gurgles. I felt my way out of the room and ended up in the hallway, which was very cold and dark compared to the bedroom. I couldn't see anything. I was guiding myself along the walls to try and get towards someone who could help me. The hallway was terrifying. There were soft whispers all around me, sometimes coming very close to my face. There was a presence right behind me the whole time. I would feel fingertips trace along my shoulders and back if I crawled too slow. I was crying the whole time, and I should mention that I could actually feel time passing throughout this whole ordeal. I spent at least 2 hours crawling through that hallway. I remember touching the walls around me and they felt spongy and weak. If I pushed too hard, they would fall over and there would be nothing but more blackness behind them, and the faint sound of an air raid siren going off in the distance. It was freezing cold, and my hands and feet were numb. Eventually, I stopped crawling and just laid down on my stomach. I felt the presence behind me wrap around my ankles and slowly drag me back to the bedroom. I wasn't even scared anymore, I just felt completely hopeless. Back in the bedroom I became very angry and went into a fit. I was screaming and kicking the walls and floor, rolling around like a toddler. I smashed a table over and felt the wood splinter and cut me. I didn't care. I screamed and gurgled until I ran out of breath. Then, I was knocked onto the ground near the foot of the bed. My arms, legs and neck were restrained, and I was forced to look straight ahead at the ceiling. The humming became very loud, and I couldn't hear anything, even my own voice. Something was standing right over me, but I couldn't see anything, I just felt it right in front of me. Suddenly, it felt like my whole body was being dipped into sand up to my neck. And when I was covered in sand, it started to pulse with my heartbeat. It was the most disgusting, horrible feeling. This happened for hours. Overall, I think the whole thing was over 6 hours until I guess I passed out. I woke up in the exact same position that I fell asleep, except my voice was nearly gone and I had weird scratch marks on my arms and feet. I asked my friends if I was talking or yelling in my sleep, or moving around and sleepwalking, and they said didn't hear anything. When I got home later that day, I noticed I had little red scratch marks on my shoulder blades and lower back as well. No way my words can do it justice. My nightmares are very cinematic and disturbing. Distant shot of the back of a woman at a piano. As it zooms in, the sound you thought was a piano is actually horrific screams. As the camera gets closer to her, it slowly pans around to reveal she is not playing the piano, but frantically sewing the skin of her arm back together with a sewing machine. Her face is a mixture of pain, and the remorse of a woman who fears her husband will beat her if she doesn't get the house cleaned up before he gets home. Almost guilty, like she's messed up yet again. She's staring at her arm, watching her work, all while screaming at the top of her lungs. The camera holds on to this shot for a few seconds. Then she turns her head and looks right into your eyes. 9/11 happened when I was 13, and literally every single night for at least 3 months after, I had an extremely vivid recurring dream that I was staring out of a window of a burning World Trade Center, trapped, knowing I was going to die. I would constantly wake up terrified and in tears. Seeing all of those videos seriously scared my mind. I was old enough to understand how horrific it was, but not old enough to process and cope with it. When I was a kid, I had one dream. One singular dream that would have me in tears every time. I had died, and my soul was floating around in outer space, with no one else around me. I was just staring into blackness. For the rest of time. And then I'd wake up and realize that eventually, no matter how old I live to be, that I'd die, and spend an eternity as a conscious being. It wasn't heaven or hell per se, but it was the religious notion that we lived on forever. I can't possibly think of a fate worse than that. To watch the planets and stars all fade away with time and be left conscious of all of it, until there was nothing, just you. By yourself, forever. Couple that with the fact that I was raised by my grandparents and was an only child. It was a pretty lonely realization. I had an epic dream that culminated in facing off against the angels of death. I was flying and there were 3 of them on the other side of a field, gray and stringy, evil-looking and moving towards me while holding the same pose, like a weeping angel. Scared the hell out of me, but I decided that I'd fight them and wound up my arm with a massive backhander. When they reached me, I let fly and backhanded them good. Then woke up screaming because I'd backhanded the wall in my sleep. I was having a dream and realized that I was dreaming, so I decided I should try to wake up, something I feel compelled to do whenever I have a lucid dream for some reason. I think I wake up, but I find I can't move and there's an old woman standing motionless in the corner just staring at me. She didn't look exactly normal and there was something disturbing about her appearance that was very creepy, although with dreams being what they are I can't exactly put my finger on it. I had a dream where I was on a date with this girl I used to know. We were eating pizza. Then she got really horny and crawled up on the table. She grabbed her shirt like she was gonna release the twins. But instead, she tore open her rib cage and torrents of sand started pouring out. Like, more sand than could ever occupy her ventral cavity. Then I woke up. Then there's this other one I get when I'm sick. It's a recurring dream that isn't lucid, which is out of the norm for me. It doesn't contain any actual imagery, it's mostly just squares and cubes flailing around. There's a constant pressure to tell these unseen beings what to do, but it just keeps repeating there. I do it and it continually resets ad infinitum. I have a certain dream that sets off panic attacks for me. It's a weird one. So, the dream starts with a close-up of a slightly leaky tap. A droplet oh so slowly forms at the tap spout. It builds and builds until it releases. It falls the short distance into the basin with an insignificant ping. It goes dark for a second and now I find myself standing over a colossal discharge tube at a dam. Water is surging out of this house-sized tube several hundred tons per second. It is deafeningly loud. It suddenly goes dark again and silence returns. The tap comes back into view, and I watch another droplet gather at the spout, eventually falls and pings against the basin. It typically cycles like that until it wakes me. I usually have to go outside, sit down, and breathe. I was at my elementary school, standing across the street and watching the cars in the car lane at the front of the school. My mom was in a beige Toyota. Which was weird because she drives a maroon Miata. She was right in front of the school and her car blew up. I ran over to where she was. She was laying down, facing me. Her chest was burned terribly. I was crying and trying to get help. She looks up at me, with tears streaming down her face and says, "There was so much more I wanted to learn about you." And died. I woke up sobbing. Another dream I had was in the parking lot of my middle school. It was black and white, and someone had brought everyone in my family and all the students in my high school. It was raining and lightning. They had given us weapons and soon it turned into mass murder and panic. I was running and running, just trying to find my family again to let them know I was alive, and hoping they were alive. There have been plenty more dreams like this. These are just the ones I remember best. This one is recurring, but I tend to get to different places every time. The most I experienced in this dream is as follows. I wake up into pitch black darkness. I can move, but it's as if I'm suspended in the air and cannot make progress in any direction. I can flip and turn, but never move forward or backwards. Up and down do still exist though. Most of the dreams are just me trying to figure out what's going on, until I hear a ridiculously faint noise. I stop moving and listen, and can hear a tiny laugh in the distance, like that of a child. It seems to go in a circle around me, and very slowly inch towards me. This happens for what seems like hours until out of nowhere it sounds like it's coming right for me. As it barrels towards me, the laughs turn to blood-curdling screams and get horrifically loud, and I feel my environment start to shake and crumble. I used to have this recurring dream as a kid. It was odd to say the least. This particular dream only occurred when I was staying at my great-grandma's beach house, which was only like 3 days out of each year. Anyway, I was a child in my dream as well, maybe 5 or 6. I would be walking around the beach trailer park by myself, typically on a gloomy evening, of course. Every night, I would begin to hear this blood-curdling scream coming from the trailer next to ours, which was weird, because there was not trailer next to us in reality, although everything else was exactly the same in the dream. I would stand just outside the trailer, listening to the struggle and the screams, petrified, terrified to move. After a few moments, the screams would always abruptly stop, and I'd begin to hear slow footsteps coming toward the entry of the trailer, approaching me. The door opened, there was always this creepy goat walking on its hind legs, wearing a red sweater, and holding a pair of bloody socks. He would walk right past me, and hang the socks on a clothesline, dripping with blood. Then he would sharply look at me and begin to laugh, at which point I always woke up. I never had this dream anywhere but that particular trailer, on that particular beach. It never changed, nothing ever happened differently. It went on for about 6 years. When I was a kid, I saw the skull of a reindeer with glowing red eyes, covered in a black hood, just like I'd probably imagined the Grim Reaper. A couple of years later, my mother began to play Neopets, in which there was a small thumbnail advertisement that looked exactly like the dead in my dream. Fast forward a few more years, at approximately age 15, I have the exact same dream. I subconsciously began to imagine what it meant and woke up in tears. Not per se scary, but life-changing for me. When I was about 9, I lived in an unsure neighborhood, and right at the corner was a gas station that I always went to get candy. The owner is pretty cool. He would take me and my siblings to a gymnastic place with all these soft mats and teach us judo. One day some unsure people came to his station and threatened him. Later that night I had a dream. I was inside the store's back room and was helping the owner move boxes and whatnot. Suddenly I hear screeching tires and a car pulling up. It was the same unsure people I saw earlier. The glass shattered and I felt a piercing pain in my neck. I looked at my surroundings, and as if everything went into slow motion, I saw the ground turn vertical. My neck was bleeding. I had been shot. The cold blood ran down my neck and slowly my eyes rolled back, and everything turned black. I could feel my body becoming cold, the blood seeping and running down my shoulder, making a puddle on the ground. Right as I was on the verge of total death, I woke up. I could still feel the cold blood on my neck. I placed my hand on my neck about 5 times after every 10-20 minutes to check I wasn't shot. I had a dream me and some friends were driving to a city I'd never been to. I was riding in the back, and before we got to the city we passed over this bridge which has a section in the middle which can rise to let ships pass underneath. We get into the city, mess around for a bit, and are on our way out. We go over the same bridge, but just as we are about to pass over the middle section, it rises up and the car falls into the river. I'm panicking, trying to get the door or window open, but everything is stuck. Water starts flooding in, and at this point I think I'm going to die. I did not know I was dreaming and thought I was actually about to die. I snapped awake a second later, my heart was beating out of my chest, and I was sweating profusely. It took a few seconds to gather myself before I remembered what was going on and realized I had been dreaming. It woke me up around 4 a.m. and I didn't end up going back to sleep after that. I was locked up in a poorly lit cave. There was an old sword laying there, and from a little hole 3 wolves came out. I picked up the sword, it turned into a wooden sword, so I just bashed the wolves with it. 2 were already dead when the sword turned into metal again, so I stuck it in the last wolf. Then the wolves turned into my siblings, lying dead, and my youngest sister standing in front of me, with a sword sticking out of her chest, looked me in the eye and asked me, "What about my birthday?" Then fell down. That's when I woke up, nearly in tears and shaking.
I usually have very strange dreams, but this one stuck out. I'm walking down a road made of faces. They're still alive, and I can feel my bare feet tear through the weak flesh. I walked through noses, eyes, ears, and mouths. They all fell away and moved around like gravel in a road. I wasn't very surprised, though. It's like I was expecting to walk on these faces, and know that, even though they cry and whine in pain, they are just as dismissible as gravel rocks on the pavement. The trees are people rooted to the ground, screaming. They're all trying to call out to me, blood draining from their faces as the roots suck up all the nutrients from their bodies. Their branches are just elongated fingers and small spikes from the fractures of their bones in the forearms. Whenever their branches grow, the flesh stretches, grows weak, and slowly peels off like bark. Their teeth are falling out and blood is just dripping out of their gums. They scream, but soon I can't hear them. I'm only frightened by the sight of them. I couldn't take my eyes away. I knew I was suffering from sleep paralysis at this point. I keep walking. The people under my feet cry in pain. They are virtually unintelligible. I don't know what to do. My vision changes, and suddenly the road of faces and suffering 3 people appear on television. I'm sitting next to an old, ugly man. His face is gnarled and one of his eyes has fallen out. He has a wooden leg and on the kneecap there is a picture of one giant eye. The man tries to kiss me, and I push him away. He is upset, and the eye of the wooden leg grows. His wooden leg comes off and the man dies, while the wooden leg transforms into a spear of sorts and starts stabbing my legs. I can feel the punctures deep in the marrow of my bones. The blood doesn't start flooding out right away, but when it does my blood is black. Not only is it a strange color, but it's caustic or acidic. I don't know. It burns, and I see smoke come out of my eyes and mouth. I'm literally disintegrating in front of my own eyes. I watch my body turn into a black mass of burning flesh. I can hear the fat of my skin pop and fizzle. It all looks sickly and diseased. At this point, I am in full-on panic. I can't wake up. I'm crying, but not making a sound. I can feel the tears run down my face, but I still see my body in a puddle of diseased flesh. My mouth opens, but no sound. I'm paralyzed. I try again and again to make a sound. So far, I'm at a silent scream. Air is passing through my throat, but not powerful enough to shake the vocal cords. I keep trying. What started out as a squeak turned into a full-fledged curdling scream. I woke up my boyfriend and myself. I can't sleep for the rest of the night. Yes, I have problems with nightmares. I was on a cliff edge, covered in gravel, and there was a narrow trail leading down to the very bottom of a rocky valley. I somehow slipped on the gravel and fell off the cliff, landed on the trail, but grabbed onto a steel cable that ran along the trail. So, there I was hanging above a deadly rocky valley, and I could feel strong pain in my arms from holding on to the cable. Then my dad appeared and pulled me out. But as soon as I was back on the cliff, my dad slipped and fell all the way down on the rocks, was dead. Then my mom showed up, looked down, said she can't live without him, said it was all my fault, and jumped after him. I started crying and tried to crawl down the gravel trail to get to their bodies, but slipped again, and woke up. The reoccurring nightmare of the whispering people. It never had much detail besides darkness, a feeling of dread and foreboding, and the feeling of being chased. I never saw anything behind me. All around me, I'd hear a chorus of fervent whispering that would sometimes suddenly crescendo into an almost cymbal crash and fade back down to lower levels. It sounded like a group of people speaking in tongues. I rarely if ever understood what they were saying. The worst part about it was that sometimes I could hear them while I was awake. It's not as frequent now that I am an adult, but every now and again it comes back. Had a nightmare once which involved me alone in my home. Lights are all not working and only the glow from outside causes any light to come inside my house. I hear scratching and something causes me to not be able to walk, so I collapse on the floor crawling to try and get to my phone. All during this time, the sounds of scratching and dark husky laughing follow me. I crawl down the stairs and eventually make it to the living room and reach for the phone. As I do, something pulls me away, flips me on my back, and I see this rotting face with fangs come right up and bite my face. I wake up in a cold sweat. Thank God, it was just a nightmare. Go back to sleep and dream again, which just sets up a similar situation with the monster again. That was a fun night. This was actually a recurring nightmare I had when I was a child. I had this dream for years. The scary part about this dream was that I knew exactly where it took place, as it was on the way to visit my father's side of the family, which was about 25 to 30 minutes away. Anyways, I probably started having this dream around the time I was 8 to 9. In the dream, I was an adult and I'd be driving down this dark country road very late at night in a green pickup truck. It was raining extremely heavily. So hard I could barely see out of the window. I had my windshield wipers going like crazy. I was going below the speed limit, which is 80 kilometers per hour, because of the weather. The windshield wiper cleared the window. Won't back up and I could barely see, then it would clear it again. This repeated a few times. The final time it cleared and there was a man standing in the middle of my lane facing the car wearing a huge green raincoat with the hood pulled up over his face. Think of the guy in the movie I Know What You Did Last Summer. I didn't have enough time to stop and hit him. I sat in my car freaking out, wondering what to do. Thinking I majorly screwed up. I decided in the end to get out and check on him. I slowly walked up to him and stared down at him. I couldn't see his face. I bent down to see if I could find a pulse, to see if he was alive, and at that point his hand quickly shot up and grabbed me by the back of the head and started pulling me down. That's when I woke up every single time. For years. The scariest part was when I was 16 we moved to a house that was a 5-minute drive away from the location where the dream took place. It scared me. When I'd visit my friends in my old town late at night, I'd take a huge detour so I would never have to drive past it. Now I'm fine, but it scared me for a few years. In my dream, I was back in my elementary school playground. We were having recess, and someone had the idea to play hide and seek. So, I'm the seeker and begin looking for people. Over the course of the dream, the playground keeps getting less and less populated, like people were disappearing. Every time I found one of my friends who was playing hide and seek, they'd always be dead and dismembered. Eventually, I was the only one left in the playground, and I kept looking around trying to find somebody else alive there. Suddenly, I felt a hand on my shoulder and something sharp touch my back, and then I woke up. I won't divulge my actual worst nightmare, as I keep that on lockdown. But I will revisit 2 of my recurring childhood nightmares I've since come to terms with and no longer bug me. Childhood Nightmare 1. I always came into this nightmare while wandering around what I thought was a large house. Until I came upon clear indications of exam rooms and medical equipment. Once I realized that I was in a hospital with seemingly no one else in it, the nightmare fuel began to start. Every room, every hallway, even elevators and stairwells, had a guide track on the ceiling. This served as the transportation method for a fairly large medical cutting laser on an articulated arm. Imagine, if you will, the James Bond death table laser, but mounted onto a dentist X-ray arm, hanging from the ceiling. The laser was autonomous, and it chased me throughout the hospital every time. The room and floor layouts would change, making it difficult to navigate and attempt to run and/or hide from it. The windows and doors were always locked, so I couldn't escape it. I would usually wake from this nightmare in a panic after it had cornered me in a room and had begun cutting away at the possible hiding places. This nightmare eventually ended after popping up on and off for years. In the final nightmare, the hospital in particular was a very run-down building, perched on a seaside cliff as if it were a lighthouse. After being chased by the laser for a while, a few choice dodges and rolls while in a wing overlooking the cliff eventually caused the laser to cut through some important structural supports. Part of the ailing building collapsed and fell off the cliff, the laser being trapped on one of the rails in the crumbling section while I had scurried off into the safe area. The nightmare didn't occur again after that. Childhood Nightmare 2. I hadn't actually seen the whole movie Alien when I was young. I'd caught glimpses of it, but mostly I knew of the infamous xenomorph aliens by way of arcade machines. I found xenomorphs absolutely terrifying. Fast-moving predators that could crawl through vents and were virtually invisible in the dark thanks to the black carapace. Mix in the acid blood, awful hissing noises, and the second mouth thing, and it's perfect preteen nightmare fuel. I found myself, on repeated dreams, in a labyrinthian-like maze. I could partially blame Jim Henson for that, but this maze lacked any cute Muppets. 15-foot-high walls made out of stone made sure I couldn't climb over, but it served a perfect place with long corridors for the wall-climbing xenomorphs to chase me. It took years to not die and abruptly wake up within a few minutes. I eventually became fast enough in the nightmare to outrun them, but I never knew where I was going. Even if I could beat them in a pure sprint, I would be quickly outmaneuvered by stumbling into a dead end and having them come over the walls. At some point, a few of them became equipped with polearm weapons and flying discs. The discs flew faster than they could run, so if one of these disc-riding xenomorphs came swooping down from the sky, I was quickly pinned to a wall and murdered. What little advantage I had in speed had been lost. In the final nightmare, there was an accident. A disc-riding xenon swooped in too fast, skimmed off the ground, and tossed the rider. I impulsively took the disc while the rider was still recovering, and I finally made it over the walls and into the sky. I had no idea how enormous the maze I had been trapped in was, but it seemed to go on for miles in all directions like a city. I saw, in the center of this labyrinth, a large metal dome. I was out of reach of the wall crawlers, but a new wave of disc-riding Xeons and a few ones with enormous demonic/bat wings were now heading in my direction to put an end to me. I flew instinctively towards the dome. When I arrived at the dome, I let off the disc and onto the surrounding wall. The flying disc crashed into the dome and it failed spectacularly, crumbling apart as if it had been rusted and was simply waiting to fail. Inside the massive dome was an enormous human brain. This confused me. But with the Xeons still on my trail and now seeming more desperate than ever to destroy me, I leapt into the brain and passed through it. I lost sight of myself. My view went to third person and panned out, revealing the entirety of the maze. Several electric arcs shot out of the brain and traced along the nearby walls, before a sudden shockwave pulse shot out. The walls crumbled and the Xeons turned to dust. All that was left was the brain, floating idly above a seemingly endless sea of gently churning water. I never had the Xenon Labyrinth dream again after that.
This one was both my worst and my most traumatizing. It's a dark room and I see everyone I love dearly tied to chairs. My mother and father, 2 little brothers, me at the time girlfriend, and 2 very close friends. It took me a few minutes to realize that I was also sitting with my hands bound. I was also gagged, unlike everyone else. There was some being there. An evil being that was doing all this to all of us. I had to watch as it tortured everyone there, leaving my girlfriend for last, and torturing her the longest. He then killed them all, again, saving my girlfriend for last. I woke up sobbing, scratch marks on my arms. And I was violently shaking. It was definitely the worst nightmare I've ever had, thank God I've only had it once. My newborn sister died when I was 3. Shortly after, I had a dream where my family and I were at a pool. My sister fell in, so I dove in to grab her, but once I had pulled her out of the water she turned into a horrible monster. So, I threw her back in. Once she hit the water she turned back into herself, but it was too late, and she drowned. I was outside the city, near a large manor my family had rented, having a fight with my girlfriend. She then left and returned to the city. Later in the evening I was playing with my little sister outside the manor, and I saw, far above the city, some kind of Russian plane landing a large atomic bomb over it and all the city exploded. In fear, I took my sister, told my family what just happened, and tried to reach my girlfriend, no response. Now, this is where it gets upset. I had a vision that showed some of my friends burning and struggling with pain on the floor. As it wasn't painful enough to watch them suffer, some of them began to transform themselves into some sort of satanic zombies full of rage and ate each other's. Also, aliens. Watching the news, we learned that the whole planet was in a nuclear zombie war, as alien monsters came out of nowhere to kill everybody. Inside the manor, everyone was going crazy and began killing themselves, my mother, father, grandparents, cousins. I flew with my younger brother and sister, as they wanted to kill them too, Jim Jones style. Outside, there were enemies everywhere, we were overwhelmed. Now I could skip this part as it is really weird, but I assure you I was scared. I was completely sure that the goats were trying to kill us. These goats were evil, man. The thing is, all they did was eat peacefully their herb. Anyway, I still killed them all with my gun. While I was killing the happy goats, I lost my siblings. I swore to protect them, and I failed at my task. They were probably already dead, and I could hear enemies. Now there were not Russians, zombies, aliens, or goats, but Nazis. I don't know why. I was so scared that there was only one thing to do in order not to suffer. I took my gun and put it against my head in order to end my fear. It never happened to me, to be so scared in a dream to actually want to kill myself. Makes me wonder on how a pussy I would be in real life. Sight star. Just before I pulled the trigger, I heard my sister's scream. I ran as fast as I could and saw her in the hands of a large evil Nazi, with my brother on the ground, suffering. I lifted my brother up, and tried to save my sister, but other Nazis pointed their gun at us, and I knew the only way I could save my brother's life and not kill us all, it would be to flee now. My brother pulled me away and told me there was nothing we could do, and we ran, and as I was running I turned over and saw the Nazi pulling a single blade razor under the throat of my little sister. As she was crying and screaming for my help, he just slit her throat. And I woke up. Additional note, as it turns out, it was the aliens that sent a Russian plane to drop a bomb on the city, knowing that it would start a world nuclear war, and make their job easier if we start killing each other first. Clever alien bastards. That is why they are a superior race. Then I thought, it was my dream. Does it mean that? I used to have this same dream over the span of 6 years, starting at age 5. In this dream I am running from a giant boulder like the one in Indiana Jones. Eventually, the boulder would catch up, hit, and kill me. I would then be on top of planet Earth, naked looking into the darkness of space. It was a very calming scene, and it was always my favorite part. This would soon end though, as I look up ahead and see a giant meteor hurtling towards Earth. I would stick my hands out and try to stop it, but before it hit I would always wake up sweaty and with really warm hands. I'm at the base of a stone tower, this kind, and I'm with one of my cousins. It's in the middle of nowhere, nighttime, and there is a really heavy mist all around. I hear moaning and the shuffling of feet on grass, and if I squint I can make out some kind of light. They are torches, and they are heading our way. More torches pop up in the distance, and the moaning comes closer. I take my cousin by the hand and rush into the tower and close the heavy wooden door. By this time, the moaning is right outside, and we head up the spiral stone staircase. On the first floor there is a similar door to the one at the base. We go inside the room and shut and bolt the door behind us. When I do this I hear the entrance door breaking down in a crash. They are coming up the stairs. Through the window I can see that even more torches are massing towards the tower from every direction. Only one way to go. We proceed upwards, and after every stair there is a door, and after we bolt that door, the door below crashes in. Always more torches for each level we ascend. Finally, we reached the top. No more doors. From here we can see in every direction. There is a sea of torches below us, surrounding us, and the moaning is so loud it's like they are beside us. We hear and feel how a mass of whatever they are coming up the stairs. They are at the door, the last door, and they are trying to break it down. We huddled up next to each other as far away as from the door as possible. I try to cover my cousin as I know that they will be inside within minutes. The creaking of the door and the moaning gets louder and louder, and there is an endless sea of torches below us. The door shatters inward with an explosion-like sound and I wake up. I've only had it once and it was 10 to 15 years ago or more, but I remember it better than any dream I've ever had. When I was little, I had a dream that I was playing in a hallway of my house. I could see my parents cooking dinner in the kitchen. Then, I had a sensation of something, I'm not sure what, but something very ominous. I got up to warn them and ran into an invisible wall between me and them. I banged my fists on it and tried to yell for help, but they couldn't hear me. I was completely cut off from them. This was when the wall started pushing, driving me back into another room. Though I couldn't see it, I knew in that room lay horrors unimaginable. It pushed me back and back, and I could hear the roars of the room behind me. Then I woke up. I had a dream where I somehow was hit in the face, really hard. The whole top left part of my jaw fell off, teeth and all. It was laying on the ground in front of me, along with a few other bloody teeth. I just stared at it. I felt no pain, but pure horror, staring at a piece of my own skull laying on the ground. I used to have these reoccurring dreams when I was a kid. It always started with me being outside alone during the night. I was on my way back home from a friend's place or something. It was literally dead outside, no other life on the streets than me, and this thing that was chasing me. I never got to see what it was exactly, but when looking back once to see how far away he was dark and a bit like the hulking figure. Somehow the streetlights never shined on him, and he was always dark. What happened in the dreams is that this thing was following me. The worst part was that the ambience was always realistic, and the place where we were currently living in, we moved a lot over the years, and each time I had the dream it was in the real place that it happened. So, I ran from it, tried to hide when he was too far away. He always just walked after me, never ran. I remember I wasn't too afraid of it in the dream, more like bothered by it and found it annoying. So, I tried to hide all the time. I would probably hide about 4 to 5 times during one dream. Each time I hid somewhere I started hearing him coming closer. He always knew where I was hiding. I looked up behind a car / trash can / etc. and he was really close and always dark. So, I ran further until I couldn't see him anymore and tried hiding again. After 5 to 6 times I usually gave up, and whenever he was just about to get to me I would wake up sweating and my heart racing. And that would usually mean no more sleep for me that night. This nightmare occurred probably about 30 to 40 times in 12 to 14 years. I haven't dreamed it in 6 years now though. Let's hope me revisiting this and writing the story down won't bring it back. Smiley face. I used to have reoccurring nightmares about me and my best friends going off to war. We would be sitting in school when we would hear about the beginnings of war, a new war. It would then jump straight to us in combat. The dream wasn't always the same, but it always had the same result. I would be shot somewhere in my body that rendered me useless to fight, but the shot wasn't fatal. Then my friends would all die in some brutal way while I watched, helpless. The dream always varied. For instance, at one point my friend, we'll call him Kyle, was running to me to help me out once I'd been shot. Kyle was shot in the throat, and I vividly remember watching him choke on his own blood a few feet away from me, and I couldn't help him. These dreams screwed me up for a while. They would appear every now and then. I would always wake up sweating with my comforter on the floor in the early morning, then have trouble going back to sleep. It even ruined my Call of Duty for me until a couple of days after I'd had the dream. I'm only 17 and don't plan to experience war, but from what I've seen from those nightmares convinced me that war is possibly the scariest thing out there. I've had a couple, both recurring. I was about 4 years old in both. One was where I was fleeing with my auntie from a T-Rex in the back of a 4x4, Jurassic Park style. Next thing I know, I'm in some great hall somewhere with my mom and there is a raptor searching for us, and my mom just drank bleach in order to die, and I'm left there holding her whilst she dies, knowing this dinosaur would come and kill me because my mom wasn't there to protect me anymore. Second one, me and my older brother witnessed these guys committing a crime and they saw us, and we ran home. I then go to be thinking we've escaped them. I roll over to face my window and his face is just there, staring at me. This happened when I was about 13 or 14 years old. Usually all I can remember from my nightmares is the pain. But this one in particular is extremely vivid, and I'll never forget it. I was trying to go to sleep, staring at the ceiling, wondering what was keeping me up, and I assumed I had already fallen asleep, because what happened next was definitely part of a nightmare. I heard tapping at the other end of the hallway from my bedroom. My bedroom is the last door in the hallway. Like fingernails on a desk. It sounded like my dog walking on the hardwood, but heavier. Subtle but distinct. Heavy and slow. It was getting closer. Up until then, I hadn't given it my full attention besides using it to lull me to sleep. Then everything went quiet. Everything. The buzzing of the streetlight outside my window, the light knocking of the ceiling fan as its unbalanced blades rotated, the hum of my computer, the whistling of the air conditioning. It all stopped. The only thing left was my heartbeat, and that tapping. Each tap was about a second apart, coming closer. I called my dog, hoping I could end the suspense. The tapping slowed, but still approached. In the middle of the hallway was a wall-mounted light, and we always kept it on. Whenever someone passed, I could see their shadow on the wall outside my bedroom. As I watched, waiting for a sign of something or someone familiar, the wall of the hallway eclipsed with black, as slowly as the tapping came closer. It felt like an eternity had passed, watching, and waiting, witnessing the light in the hallway be consumed with darkness. The seeping light into my bedroom was gone by then. The only light left was from outside. Then I saw it. I'm not sure I can describe what it was or what it looked like, but I'll try. It was bony but tall. Black skin with stains of red. Sides as hands and long but slender bird-like legs. Slumped, shrugging shoulders and a broad, ribbed chest. My stomach is almost non-existent. Its face burned into my memory. The look of hate. Its gazing, small but piercing eyes. Ears that sank into the skull. Short forehead and high, pointed cheekbones. Strings of dead and faded black hair sparsely populated its scalp. No nose at all. Its head always cocked, twitching from side to side. I couldn't speak or move. I was frozen. It crept into my doorway then stopped. It stared at me. Through me. Like I was there but didn't exist. Its head still twitching. It let out a deep, loud wheeze, as if exhaling, but its mouth closed. It crept forward. It only took 2 or 3 steps in before it was completely over me. Still staring, twitching its head. It raised its stained blades slowly above its head. It then let out the most horrifying screech. It was quiet, but ear-shattering. I'm not sure how to explain it. All with its mouth still closed. It started cutting into me. Hacking and slashing at my chest and stomach. It was the most painful thing I've ever experienced. Slowly, the sound faded out. I could eventually hear nothing, but the pain never stopped. I watched in silence as it violently dissected me. Then my vision blurred, then faded. Everything was growing darker, all the while still feeling it tear into me. Abruptly, my hearing came back, and I heard screaming. And my chest and throat were burning. It was me screaming. I tried to move, but I couldn't. I opened my eyes, and my brother was on top of me, pinning me down by my shoulders. After I stopped screaming, he got off of me and asked if I was all right. I could hardly breathe, and it took hours for the pain to go away. My brother said I had been screaming for 10 minutes. Me and my grandmother were in one of the more notoriously dangerous streets of the suburb that we lived in. I grew up with her, except in this dream, there was a darker, evil vibe that overwhelmed the street, and it was as dark as midnight with sunglasses. We were being hunted down by faceless thugs, yelling over the top of their lungs that, and I was around 7 years old, trying to drag her through the street to find some house to hide in. Terrifying. I was sitting in my grandmother's basement. It was nicely made with a futon and a couch. In the basement you can see the staircase until about halfway up where the wall covers it. So, I am watching TV and I see my dad walk up the steps. I think nothing of it, and then I see a silhouette come down the staircase. I figure it is my dad returning. I take my eyes off the TV, and I see my younger brother next to me with blood and scratches all over his face, and he starts laughing hysterically and swings a kitchen knife at me. I woke up and nearly killed myself. Being on some sort of tour through a warehouse with sections divided by metal garage door-type coverings. People I vaguely recognized were working with 6 armed contraptions when a fire broke out. The tour group panics while the workers don't seem to notice. I try to lift one of the gates only to sear my hands and watch them blister. I call my sister to say goodbye, and while I'm thinking, damn, this is it, I'm suddenly on the outside looking at the scene. Freaked me the hell out at the time. This nightmare occurred when I was stationed in Monterey. I drove up the hill, but there was no one else around. The whole base was empty. Then I saw them, nearly 3,000 and counting, every person I knew standing in a crowd at the top of a steep escarpment. They stood as if at attention, but with their heads raised to the sky. Across their eyes was painted a stripe of blood, but their eyes were locked open. The sky swirled with dark, smoky clouds and wisps of red light. The air became completely thick, and hard to breathe. Then I saw the beast, coming over the hills to the south. I knew in my mind that the beautiful countryside of Big Sur, and the storybook city of Carmel had fallen under its stride. The people assembled welcomed me into their circle, and I felt myself drawn in, unable to resist. The beast lumbered closer, taking 3 city blocks in each step. As it did, so did wisps of light and shrieks of ecstatic pleasure rise from the ground. The people of the city had assimilated into the beast, and I knew it felt at once excruciating and incredible. Its face finally lowered through the clouds, and I beheld its visage. It had virtually no distinguishable facial features, but its eyes were my own. It knelt on the hillside and surrounded our circle with its hands. Its skin melded into the ground itself. As it opened its mouth we could see the bodies and souls of all the people it had consumed. It spoke of death, and blood, and acceptance. And as it stood up once again, and the crowd began to wail their hymns of praise to the beast, I felt myself lifted into the air. I was high enough to look all the way into the mountains when I saw the others emerging from above the clouds. And I started to weep, because I knew they would destroy the whole world, and I was somehow connected to them. Pleasure, blood, and the flesh titans in the sky. Really, the only reason I was able to remember this nightmare is because I wrote down everything I could remember in the bedside moleskin. I feel like I shouldn't have remembered it, but it was at once horrifying and fascinating. When I was growing up I had the same nightmare every night until I was 9. It started as a view from my window, and then panned down to me lying in bed. A large bolt of lightning would flash across the sky, and thunder would follow. I would then hear heavy footsteps coming down my hallway and hear a loud groaning. Then a heavy-set monster, think Sasquatch or Sully from Monsters Inc., would come into my room and grab me. I would scream as loud as I could, and I knew my parents could hear me, but they never came to help. They just watched as I was carried down the hall kicking and screaming, into the darkness. I would then wake up and fall right back asleep to repeat that dream. Probably the scariest dream of my life, that I will share, was one that seemed to start off as a regular day. In my dream, I would wake up, in my bed, and I would get ready for work. I had a shower, got dressed, and then started to walk to work. I worked at a hospital at the time, and there was a gas station which was about the halfway mark between my house and my work. In my dream, I got to the gas station, but something would be different. The sign would be wrong, or just different. As I reached the hospital, I would feel pressure on my teeth, and then suddenly they would start chipping, and my mouth would bleed. I still went to work, trying to avoid smiling, to hide my broken teeth. Then, something tragic would happen. I was crushed by a massive metal bin, and just as it hit me, and killed me, I would shoot up in bed like it was all a dream. However, when I woke up, I was still in my dream. So, I would get out of bed, have a shower, get dressed and head to work. Again, on the way, something was different. A sign, a road, or trees. Something would always be changed. I got too much work, and sure enough, my teeth would start chipping off and would bleed. I did the same thing. Tried to hide my smile, and fear, and just do my job. I went to receive the loads from the semi-trucks in the loading dock, and the truck's brakes gave out, and came right for me. As soon as the truck hit me, I was killed, and again, woke up in my bed. However, I was still dreaming. So, I cautiously got out of bed, had a shower, got dressed, and started walking to work. Again, something was different. But by this time, I started to realize that not only was I dreaming, but I was trapped in a dream. I walked to work, past the gas station where something was different, and I put my hand over my mouth. Sure enough, my teeth started cracking, chipping, and bleeding. Then it hit me. I am going to die, and all I can do is wait for it to happen, and hope I actually wake up to reality. So sure enough, I was killed in some horrific event. As soon as I died, I shot up in bed. More scared now, not knowing if I was dreaming or not, I had a shower, got dressed, and walked to work. Something was off again. My teeth started to crack and bleed. Now, I just had to wait to die again. This happened 7 times in total. 7 horrific deaths. 7 times waking up in my bed, with the fear of realizing I could not get out of this dream. When I finally woke up, I laid in bed. Unable to move for fear, I was still in a dream. I laid there, rubbing my fingers over my mouth. I knew if my teeth started breaking, I was in the dream still. For about an hour I laid there. Hand over my mouth, feeling for any broken teeth. I got up, had a shower, got dressed, and walked to work. Nothing was different. I was in reality. But I did not know I was actually awake till I walked past the gas station, saw the signs, and that everything was how it should be, and my teeth didn't break. The scariest part of the dream, besides knowing you're going to die, and just waiting for it to happen, and the feeling of your teeth breaking apart in your mouth, and the blood, as scary as all that was, the biggest fear was knowing you were trapped in a dream, and there was no way to wake yourself up, and no way to know, until you saw what was off, were the broken teeth. And how you almost welcomed death, because the next death actually might wake you up, and bring you back to reality. Anyways, that was my second scariest dream. The first one, I will take to the grave. Alright, I haven't told anyone this before, so here we go. I was in the woods searching for Bigfoot in this dream, and I was searching in the woods alone for a good 2 to 3 days. I finally stumbled across some clues, random hair, footprints, and some downed trees. I kept a straight path where I found a X made from 2 giant tree branches. I entered the X, knocking it down. Where I found him, the one and only Bigfoot. He became very hostile and attacked me. I shot him and killed him. Little did I know the Finding Bigfoot crew was watching my every move. Boba lunged at me, then tackling me down and knocked me out, while Matt Moneymaker said time to make some money in a very evil and demonic voice, and took the Bigfoot carcass and walked off. I later became so ashamed that this creature had fallen into these evil hands, I killed myself. In real, my father died 15 years ago. I always have this dream where I'm going to visit my mother, and for some reason she lives in the house I grew up in again. In my dream I am kind of watching myself, like I'm hovering above the scene even though I'm in the dream too, if that makes sense. My dream self is also slightly aware that it's weird that my mom lives in our old house again, but she / me for some reason knows not to ask about it. So, we're in the garage, which is where my father died, talking about something, and out walks my dad. Everyone's just acting normally like he hasn't been gone for 13, 14, 15 years. I'm the only one who seems to remember that he's dead and gone. No one believes me. So, time goes on and he's acting normal, but it feels really scary and sinister. Eventually I start noticing that anytime I'm the only one looking at him, he starts looking at me in a really maniacal way, and anytime I have to hug him he'll whisper in my ear about how he's dead, and no one believes me. Then, one day I went to visit, and the house looked abandoned, and all boarded up. No one's lived there for years, and the rest of my family is missing. Then I woke up. I had my first nightmare at age 5. It's not nearly as creepy as some of the stuff I've read in this thread, but it was terrifying at the time. It was my birthday in the dream, and I was to have a party at my grandma's house. I went in and looked back through the window. It was now raining and starting to flood, unrealistically fast. I saw these 2 mermaid girls swimming by, and they looked like they wanted to come into the party. I opened the door to let them in, and suddenly they were just skeleton mermaids? Skeletons and dead bodies have always been my biggest fears. They went to grab me and started chasing me through the house. I went to my grandma for protection, but she pushed me away, and smiled while doing so. Everyone at the party acted happy that this was all happening. I ran down the hallway to the back of the house and curled up into the fetal position on the master bed. The skeletons burst in, then the roof flew off the house and a herd of demons charged down from the sky. 2 of them grabbed me by the arms and carried me away with them, back into the air. Then I woke up, crying. I wish I knew what all of that meant. I was around 4 when this happened, so it probably won't seem scary now. I dreamt that my mom was dating a man, but his nose was gigantic and had a plant growing out of the top of it. My mom didn't notice, but my brother and I did. We were at a bowling alley, and he was trying to kill my family. For some reason, my 4-year-old mind dreamt that the place was filled waist deep with maple syrup and the weird nose guy couldn't find us if we were underneath the syrup. That scared me when I was a little kid. Well, this isn't worst in the sense of being the scariest, but it's weird and ridiculous. And I had this nightmare when I was like 8, so it freaked me out then. Anyway, the dream starts with me at a block party. I don't recognize anyone there, save one kid who lives across the street from me. We started hanging out and talking, and we decided to go swing on the playground in the backyard. So, we're swinging and whatnot, when all of a sudden, screams erupt from the front yard. We freak out, and then, coming around the corner of the house with human legs hanging out of its mouth is a giant, man-eating carpet. Yes, my most memorable nightmare is about a rug that ate people. Scared me at the time. When I was a wee lad, say 5 or so, I had a dream where my house had been invaded by these terrible people with ski masks. I heard them as they broke in, so I climbed into the non-existent air vent system that ran along the entire ceiling of my house and had way too many grates. I crawled along and watched as they abducted my grandmother, my brother, my mother, and then my father. When these people captured them, they restrained them and pulled off their toenails. After they pulled off the final toenail of my screaming family, the leader of these men looked straight up to where I was watching from and had a big old evil grin. I started to crawl away, but his goons yanked the vent down. I woke up very afraid and I still don't enjoy clipping my toenails very much. I get bad sleep paralysis. The worst nightmare I had was coupled with it, and a good helping dash of lucidity. I was lying on my couch trying to sleep when I saw a shadow come around the corner and face me. Alone in my apartment I try my best to scream out help me, but I can't get the words out. If you've ever been terrified and lucid in a nightmare, you'll recognize the pure dread and hopelessness you feel when you attempt to scream out but can't. Anyway, this shadow would whisper my name and step closer. I can't recall exactly what was in his hand, but it was a dagger, or hatchet, or some sharp object. I remember piercing dark orbs for eyes on the shadow just staring at me, whispering my name. And the shadow would approach me, a slow methodical step, a whisper, a stare. Must have lasted a good 20 minutes before it plunged its dagger into my stomach, jolting me awake. The worst part, the terrifying thing about it all, is I was so lucid and so awake in my dream, I couldn't tell I was dreaming. My apartment looked the same, everything was normal. It was just such a subtle dream, and it made it so much more impactful to me. I watched my father get mauled to death by a grizzly bear and then carried his body to my weeping mother. I woke up in tears and cold sweat. I was getting chased by wolves. They got me and started eating my sides. I woke up screaming. That's all I remember. I was probably 6 years old, and Superman was trying to eat me. Nothing stops Superman. Nothing.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.